Caleb Morrow, Elena Morrow, and a simple burger, three names that would become forever linked in a shocking tragedy that no one in their quiet Midwestern town could have predicted. What started as an ordinary evening would spiral into a nightmare, showing how a single act, seemingly insignificant, could ignite years of hidden tension and lead to a deadly outcome. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The town where Caleb Morrow lived was the kind of place people rarely talked about on the news. It sat quietly between long highways and open fields, where days passed slowly and nights felt still. Houses were lined neatly along narrow streets, each one looking similar to the next. Lawns were trimmed, lights turned off early, and most people followed the same routine every day. It was a place where nothing seemed to change, and that sense of normal life made people feel safe. Caleb and his reminder of daily life fit perfectly into this environment. He worked long hours at a local warehouse, lifting boxes and following orders without complaint. His job was tiring but stable, and stability mattered to him more than happiness. He believed that showing up every day and doing what was expected made him a responsible man. He was not loud or social, and he rarely spoke to neighbors beyond a nod or short greeting. Many people barely noticed him at all. Elena, his wife, lived a similarly quiet life. She managed the home and worked part-time at a small retail store. Her days were filled with repetitive tasks that blurred together. She cleaned, cooked, and tried to keep everything in order. From the outside, she appeared calm and polite, someone who followed rules and avoided trouble. People who saw her at work described her as kind but distant, as if her mind was always somewhere else. Their home reflected who they were. It was clean, organized, and silent. There were no family photos on the walls, no bright decorations, and no signs of celebration. Everything had its place, and nothing stood out. The house felt more like a space that was used rather than lived in. Even the air inside felt heavy, as if emotions were held back and never allowed to escape. That evening began like many others before it. The sun set slowly, casting long shadows across the street. Cars returned home one by one, lights turned on behind curtains. Inside the Morrow house, there was no laughter, no music, and no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. It was simply another night ending after a long day. What no one could see was the pressure building beneath the surface. Small frustrations, unmet expectations, and unspoken thoughts had been collecting for years. There were no visible warnings, no sudden changes, and no dramatic events to draw attention. Everything appeared normal, and that was what made the coming tragedy so shocking. In true crime cases, people often look for clear signs before disaster strikes. They expect chaos, loud arguments, or obvious danger. But in this house, on this quiet street, there was only routine and silence. The kind of silence that hides problems instead of solving them. The night moved forward calmly, unaware that it was setting the stage for a story that would later confuse, disturb, and haunt everyone who heard it. Caleb stopped at a fast food place on his way home from work that night. The warehouse had been loud and exhausting, and his body ached from hours of lifting. The smell of grease and warm bread felt comforting as soon as he stepped inside the restaurant. He ordered the same meal he usually did, a burger with extra toppings, fries, and a drink. It was not a special treat, but it felt like a reward for surviving another long shift. Food had always held a strange importance for Caleb. Growing up, meals were often uncertain, and he learned early to value anything he could claim as his own. As an adult, small routines helped him feel stable. Buying food after work was one of those routines. It gave him something to look forward to and a sense of control at the end of the day. That burger was more than just something to eat. In his mind, it represented effort, ownership, and relief. When he arrived home, the house was quiet. The lights were dim, and the familiar stillness wrapped around him. Caleb placed the food bag on the kitchen counter and put the burger in the refrigerator. He told himself he would eat it later, once he had showered and rested. Saving it felt intentional, almost careful. He liked knowing it was there, waiting. As the night went on, the house remained silent. Time passed slowly, marked only by the hum of appliances and the ticking of the wall clock. Caleb moved through his routine without much thought. His mind drifted between work stress and personal frustrations he never expressed. The burger stayed untouched in the refrigerator, becoming part of the background, yet still holding its quiet importance. At some point, while Caleb was distracted and lost in his own thoughts, the burger disappeared. There was no sound, no obvious sign, and no moment that stood out. The refrigerator door opened and closed like it always did. To anyone else, this would have meant nothing. To Caleb, it would soon mean everything. Later, when hunger returned and he went to retrieve the burger, he noticed the empty space immediately. The container was gone. The shelf where it had been placed looked wrong to him, incomplete. His stomach tightened and his thoughts began to race. He searched the refrigerator again, then the trash, then the counter, hoping he had simply forgotten where he put it. The realization came slowly and then all at once. The burger had been eaten. Something he believed was his had vanished without permission. The situation itself was small, almost meaningless, but the reaction it triggered was not. Old feelings of being ignored and disrespected surfaced. The missing burger became proof, in his mind, that nothing in his life truly belonged to him. What should have been a forgettable detail turned into a powerful symbol. That single act, unnoticed by anyone else, quietly shifted the balance inside Caleb. The night no longer felt ordinary. A line had been crossed, and the consequences of that moment were about to unfold in ways no one could have imagined. The marriage between Caleb and Elena had not always felt heavy, but over time, it became defined by quiet strain rather than connection. In the early years, they shared simple goals and expectations. They believed stability was enough to keep them together. As life grew more demanding, those expectations remained unchanged, even when reality no longer matched them. What once felt manageable slowly turned into a weight neither of them knew how to put down. Money was a constant source of pressure. Both worked, yet it never felt like enough. Bills arrived regularly, leaving little room for comfort or enjoyment. Vacations were postponed. Plans were delayed, and small dreams were dismissed as unrealistic. Caleb internalized this stress deeply. He measured his worth through his ability to provide, and every financial shortfall felt like a personal failure. Instead of talking about it, he carried the burden silently. Elena experienced the pressure differently. Her days felt repetitive and limited, shaped by responsibility rather than choice. She felt unseen, as though her efforts were expected but never valued. Over time, she stopped expressing her frustrations, believing it would not change anything. Silence became easier than disappointment. She focused on completing tasks, not on sharing feelings, and emotional distance quietly replaced intimacy. Their home reflected this emotional divide. Conversations became brief and practical. There was no space for vulnerability or warmth. They lived side by side rather than together, sharing a house but not a life. Small disagreements were ignored instead of resolved, allowing resentment to settle beneath the surface. Each unresolved issue added another layer to an already fragile foundation. Caleb began to feel a growing sense of loss, though he could not clearly define it. He felt overlooked and unimportant, even within his own marriage. Everyday moments that might have once seemed harmless began to feel personal. He interpreted small actions as signs of disrespect, even when none were intended. Without realizing it, his perception of reality slowly shifted. Elena, meanwhile, grew accustomed to navigating life on her own. She made decisions without discussion, not out of defiance, but out of habit. She no longer expected understanding or support. This independence, born from necessity, further widened the gap between them. What she saw as survival, Caleb saw as rejection. Neither of them recognized how dangerous this emotional disconnect had become. There were no loud arguments or dramatic scenes to signal trouble. Instead, the danger lay in what was missing. Empathy, communication, and trust had quietly disappeared. Without these, even minor incidents carried the weight of unresolved pain. By the time that ordinary evening arrived, their marriage was already under severe strain. The pressure had been building for years, unseen and unaddressed. What followed was not the result of a single moment, but of long-term emotional neglect and growing resentment. The foundation of their relationship had weakened so much that it could no longer withstand even the smallest shock. When Elena ate the burger, she did not pause to consider its meaning. To her, it was food left behind in a shared home. She had come home tired, her body heavy from standing all day, her mind worn down by routine. Hunger felt immediate and physical. The refrigerator offered a quick solution, and the wrapped burger seemed like an easy answer to a simple need. There was no intention behind it beyond filling an empty stomach. She ate it quietly and without thought. The taste was ordinary, and the moment passed quickly. Once it was gone, it left no impression. It did not feel like a decision that mattered or an action that required reflection. In Elena's mind, it was one of many small choices made every day just to get through life. She did not see it as taking something away. She saw it as using what was available. What Elena could not see was how deeply Caleb connected meaning to small things. The burger existed in his mind as something saved, something earned, something untouched in a world where he felt constantly overlooked. By the time she finished eating and moved on with her evening, the burger had already become something much larger in his internal world, even though he did not yet know it was gone. When Caleb later discovered the empty space in the refrigerator, the absence felt loud. It caught his attention immediately. The shelf looked wrong, like a detail out of place in a carefully ordered environment. His mind began searching for explanations, but none of them brought comfort. The simplest answer felt like the most painful one. Something he believed was his had been taken without acknowledgement. That single realization triggered emotions he had been suppressing for years. It was not about hunger anymore. It was about feeling ignored, dismissed, and powerless. The missing burger represented every moment he felt invisible in his marriage and his life. A small act became a symbol of everything he believed he had lost control over. The danger of such moments lies in how quietly they grow. There was no argument, no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, the meaning of the act expanded inside Caleb's mind, feeding off old wounds and unmet expectations. What Elena saw as nothing became, to him, proof of deep disrespect. This is how ordinary actions turn dangerous in broken relationships. When communication is gone, people assign meaning in silence. Assumptions replace understanding. Emotions that should be shared instead turn inward and grow stronger. The burger was no longer food, it became a trigger. In many true crime cases, the turning point is not a dramatic event, but a small moment misunderstood. This was one of those moments. The act itself was harmless. The reaction it inspired was not. By the time the night continued, something inside Caleb had shifted. A boundary he never clearly defined had been crossed, and the consequences of that silent crossing were already beginning to take shape. Long before that night, Caleb carried parts of himself he never allowed others to see. His anger did not appear suddenly, and it did not begin with his marriage. It had followed him quietly for most of his life, shaped by experiences he never processed or confronted. As a young man, he learned to hide his emotions because showing them had never brought relief. Instead, silence became his way of surviving. There had been warning signs over the years, moments when his temper flared over small frustrations, times when his reactions seemed stronger than the situation required. At work, he was known as someone who kept to himself, but supervisors had noted his difficulty handling criticism. At home, his need for order and control had slowly increased. These behaviors were never violent on their own, and because nothing serious ever happened, they were dismissed as personality traits rather than red flags. Caleb never sought help. He believed emotional struggle was weakness, something to be endured alone. Stress piled up without release, forming a pressure he did not recognize as dangerous. Each disappointment added weight, and each moment of perceived disrespect reinforced his belief that the world worked against him. Over time, his thinking became rigid. He began to see situations in extremes, feeling either in control or completely powerless, with nothing in between. A firearm had been part of his life for years. He owned it legally and stored it carefully. To him, it represented safety and preparedness. He told himself it was just an object, something responsible adults owned. What he never considered was how his emotional state could change the meaning of that object. The presence of the weapon added a silent risk he failed to acknowledge. That night, the emotions triggered by the missing burger did not exist in isolation. They connected instantly to older memories and unresolved pain. Feelings of being overlooked as a child, ignored as a husband, and undervalued as a worker all blended together. His mind searched for something to blame, something to focus on, and the smallest act became the largest target. The past has a way of resurfacing when people are least prepared. For Caleb, the years of unspoken anger found an outlet in that moment. His thoughts narrowed, losing balance and perspective. Rational thinking faded as emotion took control. What should have been a passing frustration became overwhelming. This shift was internal and invisible. There were no outward signs to warn anyone nearby. He moved through the house with a sense of purpose that felt calm on the surface, but was driven by chaos underneath. The anger he had buried for so long finally had direction, even if that direction was destructive. In true crime stories, this is often the most chilling stage, the point where the past and present collide, and the person crosses a mental line without realizing it. Caleb did not see himself as dangerous. He believed he was reacting to a moment, not unleashing years of suppressed rage. By the time he reached for the firearm, the decision felt justified in his distorted perception, even though it would soon lead to irreversible consequences. The moment everything changed did not arrive with chaos or noise. It unfolded quietly, shaped by a series of internal decisions rather than sudden action. Caleb moved through the house with a strange sense of focus. His thoughts felt sharp and clear to him, even though they were driven by emotion rather than reason. The weight of years of frustration pressed down on him, narrowing his view of the world to a single point. He retrieved the firearm from where it was stored, handling it with familiarity. There was no rush in his movements. To an outside observer, he might have appeared calm, almost controlled. Inside, however, his mind was locked onto one idea. He believed something had been taken from him, and that belief felt undeniable. Logic no longer played a role. Emotion filled every space where reason should have been. The house remained quiet. Everyday sounds continued, unaware of the shift that had occurred. The stillness made the moment feel unreal, as if time itself had slowed. Caleb's breathing was steady, his body acting before his mind had a chance to question the consequences. He did not consider the future or the damage that would follow. He was focused entirely on the present moment and the feeling that had consumed him. Elena was unaware of the danger approaching. Her actions earlier in the evening had carried no meaning beyond routine. She had no sense that something so small could have triggered such an extreme response. The space they shared, once defined by silence and distance, now held an invisible tension that could no longer be contained. In a matter of seconds, a decision was made that could never be undone. The sound that followed shattered the quiet of the home, marking the exact point where everything changed. What had once been a private struggle turned into a permanent tragedy. The act itself was brief, but its impact was immediate and devastating. Afterward, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. The emotional surge that had driven Caleb forward started to collapse under the weight of truth. The house no longer felt familiar. The silence returned, but it was different now, heavy and final. The consequences of his actions stood before him, undeniable and irreversible. This moment is often described in true crime cases as the point of no return. A single act that separates before from after. No explanation, justification, or regret can undo it. Caleb's life, Elena's life, and the lives of everyone connected to them were altered forever in that instant. What makes this moment especially disturbing is how ordinary it began. There was no dramatic lead-up, no clear warning. Just a quiet house, unresolved pain, and a decision fueled by emotion rather than thought. In the end, it was not the burger that caused the tragedy, but the long path of silence, anger, and neglect that led to this irreversible moment. The aftermath of that night was a mix of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Neighbors first noticed the flashing lights outside the Morrow home. Police cars, with sirens quiet now but lights still spinning, surrounded the house. Crime scene tape cordoned off the front yard, creating a stark contrast to the quiet street that had always seemed so safe. People gathered at a distance, whispering and staring, unable to reconcile what had happened with the ordinary life they had observed for years. Inside, the scene was chaotic in its stillness. Furniture remained in place, the kitchen showed no signs of struggle, and the house looked, on the surface, exactly as it had always been. The missing burger, the object that had started it all, seemed almost absurd in the face of what had occurred. Officers moved carefully, documenting evidence, taking photographs, and speaking in low voices to one another. Every corner was examined, every detail scrutinized. The investigation was methodical, yet even the professionals found themselves shaken by the seemingly trivial trigger of the event. Neighbors and acquaintances tried to make sense of it. How could something so minor, something as insignificant as a burger, lead to murder? Friends and co-workers described Caleb and Elena as quiet, reserved people. They had no history of open conflict or public displays of anger. The case challenged assumptions about violence, showing how deep-seated emotions could explode in the most unexpected ways. Detectives began piecing together the timeline. Surveillance footage from nearby stores, receipts, and interviews with co-workers helped form a picture of the evening. It became clear that the act had been sudden, impulsive, and entirely unprovoked by anything external. There were no intruders, no financial disputes, no history of threats. The conflict was internal, a private struggle that escalated beyond reason. As investigators delved deeper, they discovered patterns in Caleb's past, incidents of anger, small confrontations, and periods of intense stress that had never been addressed. While these incidents had not previously resulted in violence, they now provided context. It was not just the burger, it was years of suppressed emotion, a marriage under strain, and a life built around control and routine. Everything that had been ignored or minimized suddenly seemed significant. Media attention followed quickly. Stories appeared online and on television, sensationalizing the seemingly absurd catalyst while also exploring the darker psychological patterns behind it. Experts weighed in, trying to explain how ordinary domestic tension could spiral into murder. Public reactions ranged from disbelief to horror, with many struggling to understand how such a tragedy could emerge from something so small. In the weeks that followed, the house remained empty, a silent reminder of the events that had transpired. Investigators continued their work, and the community grappled with the reality that violence can exist behind closed doors, invisible to the outside world. The case became a chilling example of how unchecked emotions, combined with unaddressed mental health and relationship stress, can erupt with irreversible consequences. In the end, the aftermath was not just about a single act of violence. It was about the layers that led to it, the fragile human emotions, and the invisible pressures that, when left unexamined, can explode in ways no one could foresee. The tragedy served as a haunting lesson in how ordinary lives can mask extraordinary danger, and how small moments can carry consequences far beyond anyone's imagination. Caleb's arrest marked the beginning of a legal process that would draw intense public scrutiny. Handcuffed and led from the Morrow home, he appeared calm, almost detached, though his mind was likely racing with a mixture of fear, regret, and confusion. The reality of his actions had set in, and with it came the understanding that nothing could undo what had happened. Elena's life was gone, and with it, the life they had built together, however strained it had been. Courtroom became a place where the details of the tragedy were laid bare for the world to see. Prosecutors presented the timeline, the evidence, and the motivations as they understood them. The missing burger, trivial in itself, was highlighted as the final trigger that led to a much deeper and more complex breakdown. Psychologists and experts testified about anger, impulse control, and the dangers of suppressed emotions. They emphasized how small triggers can ignite long-standing issues when left unresolved. As the trial continued, the public reaction was intense. People struggled to reconcile the absurdity of the initial cause with the seriousness of the crime. Many expressed disbelief that a missing burger could lead to murder, while others began to understand the deeper emotional and psychological patterns at play. Discussions arose about domestic stress, the importance of mental health support, and the warning signs that often go unnoticed in relationships. The case became a reference point in debates about anger management, emotional suppression, and the unseen consequences of unresolved conflict. Caleb's family and friends faced their own private turmoil. They had known him as a quiet, reserved man, and the events shattered their perception of who he had been. Feelings of grief, guilt, and confusion intertwined as they tried to process both Elena's death and Caleb's actions. They struggled to understand how a life that seemed ordinary on the surface could hide such depth of unresolved emotion and danger. Meanwhile, the broader community grappled with the reality that violence can exist behind closed doors, invisible to neighbors, friends, and co-workers. The Morrow house, once a quiet and nondescript part of the neighborhood, became a symbol of how ordinary lives can mask extraordinary risks. People reflected on the small tensions and unspoken resentments in their own lives, and the story served as a cautionary tale about how easily situations can escalate when emotions go unchecked. The legal consequences for Caleb were severe. Conviction brought years of imprisonment and the label of a convicted murderer, permanently altering the course of his life. The media coverage emphasized both the absurd trigger and the underlying factors, ensuring that the story would remain in public memory for years. In newspapers, online forums, and television specials, the case was recounted as a tragic example of how minor provocations can lead to catastrophic outcomes when mixed with unresolved psychological issues. Ultimately, the tragedy left a permanent mark. Elena's life ended abruptly, a stark reminder of how quickly violence can erupt in private spaces. Caleb's life was forever changed, serving as a cautionary example of what happens when anger, frustration, and emotional neglect remain unaddressed. The story of the missing burger became more than an odd headline. It became a lesson about human vulnerability, the hidden dangers of unchecked emotions, and the importance of confronting issues before they spiral out of control. It was a story that would be remembered, studied, and retold, not for the triviality of the initial act, but for the profound consequences that followed. The ordinary had turned deadly, leaving a community, a family, and the world to ponder how fragile life and relationships can be, and how one small act can alter everything forever.